My guest today is Albert Gore. He is the executive director of the Zero Emissions Transportation Association, which advocates for the U.S. electric vehicle supply chain. Albert, welcome to the Echo Chamber Q&A. Let's kick things off. Um, Obviously, clean energy and climate is in your DNA, but how did you get started working at Zeta? Why did you want to work on electric vehicle policy?
Well, first off, Dan, thanks so much for having me. I spent, the better part of the last 10 years in renewable energy and electric vehicle policy on the industry side. So I started at Solar City, working on the policy and electricity markets team, and moved over to Tesla as part of the uh, merger, Tesla's acquisition of Solar City in 2016. So I'm sort of an accidental electric vehicle policy advocate, but uh, came into the EV industry at a really exciting time, January 2017, and spent the next 5.5 years at Tesla, primarily working on state policy, and left in 2022, uh, end of June, and started at Zeta the following January. My wife and I had our third child in between
Congratulations.
those two. So yeah, maybe the footsteps that you hear. So it is, it's become a real passion to, continue to make the adoption of electric vehicles, uh, you know, as smooth and, ideally as efficient as possible, because there are a huge range of benefits associated with it. But not least of which is that um, there's a lot of economic activity in the United States, not just on vehicle assembly, but battery manufacturing, charging, development, electricity supply. EVs are, incredible grid assets when utilized in the right way. And, the future, as I think most of us envision it, a future that's more efficient, that's cleaner, where a lot of things are possible. It doesn't have to be the Jetsons necessarily, but where a lot of things are possible that aren't today really depends on things like batteries.
Yeah, one thing I hear from EV owners and the EV industry is just that the cars are really fun to drive. They're really nice. They can, they have a lot more features than your traditional ICE vehicle. But there's still a lot of anxiety out there. My parents just bought a new car, and I managed to talk them into a plug-in hybrid, but I couldn't get them to take the leap to a full EV. What do you say to people who are on the fence about buying an EV? It's a big jump, it's a big expense. Why take that leap?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's important to acknowledge that you know, the US is a bit different than the rest of the world in that we drive a lot here, and cars are embedded in our culture and the way our country and cities are designed in a way that isn't necessarily true in the rest of the world. We're a big country, um, but we're also the birthplace of the automotive industry, and so we drive almost twice as much here as you know the rest any other place in the world, in terms of miles traveled. So I think the idea of switching to a new technology, um, when the Great American Road Trip and things like that, we don't have a train system that can get you anywhere you need to go. Cars represented freedom, really, I think, for the greater part of the 20th century. So how do we address that? I think number one, um, charging is out there. It's not as visible as gas stations are, but there is a lot of available charging with much higher uptimes and reliability than has been the case in, I'd say versions 1 and 2 of fast chargers that were deployed. There's been a huge improvement over the last 5 years, particularly over the last 2 years in high powered, high uptime chargers. But I think, you know, getting behind the wheel an EV is the most powerful experience someone can have. And talking to a friend or a neighbor, a family member who gives, the unvarnished look at, yeah, it's great. There are things about it that need to be improved, but plenty of things about gas cars I think that aren't ideal as well.
Mhm.
And, we tend to undercount the benefits of of new technologies when we're so focused on the ways in which they're different from what we are used to.
Yeah. Yeah, you hear about chargers a lot. And what I tell people is there are never going to be fewer chargers. There are only going to be more chargers. So you buy a car
That's
now,
true.
you're worried about charging. They're building more. So
Yeah,
if that's a concern now, it's not going to be something you have to worry about, a couple of years down the line. And,
yeah.
really it's not even that big of a deal now. My parents, they live in Ann Arbor, and so they drive from Michigan to DC a couple times a year. And every rest stop on the Ohio Turnpike has a bunch of chargers that you can use. So, I think as the infrastructure gets more visible, people will
Yeah.
start to accept it more.
One thing that's challenging about building fast chargers is that if you build a fast charger and it sits unused, it is really expensive
Mm.
because you need to um, you have to compensate, the electricity supplier for uh, everything that goes into the capacity to deliver that electricity the moment it's demanded at any given time. So, um, a level 2 charger that sits unused is sort of, you're not getting charged for it. But a level 3 charger, it needs to be utilized. So it is very difficult to get too far out ahead of vehicle deployment with charger deployment. You want to ideally match those two things so
Oh,
that you're
that's
building
interesting.
stations as they will be utilized. Um, unless you're comfortable, you know, with an integrated business model, the way Tesla's done it, where you're
Hmm.
essentially, financing the charging network through the sale of the vehicles, that has enabled a really high, well-functioning, dense network. But that is a very difficult model when charging is your business model.
Hmm.
So, but costs are coming down, utilization is coming up. That's going to mean a lot more chargers much more quickly.
Is there a role for state and federal policy in kind of ensuring that match between chargers and vehicle adoption? And are there other policies that you're advocating for, either at the state or the federal level?
Yeah, there is a role. I think there. David Ferris had a piece today, just a very long form piece about sort of the second order impact of a program like NEVI in raising standards, and I think increasing standardization in terms of IP, you know, software and hardware incidentally, but also uptime and power level. So I think there's not a silver bullet for that issue. That's a market issue.
Mhm.
Um, but there are both public sector and private sector programs. Utilities often will offer their own programs um, to account for that. It's called a demand charge, but it's becoming less of an issue now as, increasingly, if you build a fast charger somewhere for a commercial purpose, you're building it where it will be utilized. Most people don't, uh, if they haven't driven an EV, don't fully appreciate how much charging is done away from fast chargers. It's rare where someone does the majority or all of their charging at a fast charger. It's not ideal for the battery either, but it can be done. Obviously, it's important for things like ride share and rental cars, things like that. Um,
But most people are charging at home with a level two.
Upwards of 90% of the time.
Yeah.
And so for folks who don't have off-street parking or who live in multi-unit dwellings, that's a very, very important focus of state and local policy
Hmm.
is, how to make it easier, um, or even better understood for both tenants and building owners on how to do that. We're also constantly seeing product innovation and business model innovation where, the cost to provide charging access to a parking space has, dramatically declined over even just
Hmm.
the last 5 or 6 years. Um, and so we're really encouraged by that. Curbside charging is ubiquitous in a lot of other places in the world,
Hmm.
and we're just scratching the surface here. There are a couple companies that are, I think, pioneering that market. Like it's electric, wall post. So I think um, that's something that will dramatically increase charging access and also visibility for people who are used to seeing gas stations everywhere they look. But um, if they see a charging post, you know, where they see parking meters or like
Hmm. Yeah.
on utility poles or light posts, I think, and that's what you see in a lot of other countries, then your range anxiety goes down significantly.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, because I mean, I live in DC. Most people park on the street, and you do see people running extension cords from a charger that they put in. Um,
Across the side, yeah, plug into a
yeah,
standard outlet. I
yeah,
had a
yeah,
friend who plugged into a standard outlet for 7 years, like never installed a level two charger, and he had a detached garage, but he was
yeah,
driving at most 30, 40 miles a day.
yeah, exactly. And if you're in the city, you just don't need to worry about your range that much.
That's right.
Um, so obviously, the IRA rollback this year was had a lot of setbacks for clean tech adoption across the board. How's that going to affect EVs? Are you still optimistic about EV adoption going forward?
I am very, very much so. For the reason you stated earlier, they're just good products. They're fun to drive. They have a lot of appeal just as, a fun car to drive. They're ultra modern. You know, I think for uh, folks who have grown up in the era of like the iPhone and um, high functionality, but um, I don't want to say minimalistic, but simple design.
Hmm.
Um, it's rare to see that in a car, but that is um, you know possible with EVs where you could turn on your heat or your AC with an app 5 minutes before you get in the car. That's not unique to EVs, but it is certainly something that is much easier with an EV. You could
Yeah.
do that in your garage if your garage door is closed, by the way, with
Hmm.
with an EV or an
Yeah.
apartment garage. So I think they have a lot of appeal. They also provide a lot of utility. If you have access to workplace charging or at home charging, you wake up with a full battery every day.
Hmm.
Um, if you plug in, you don't have, I plug in maybe once a week. Um, Increasingly, we are seeing mature programs offered by utilities that will co- uh, provide functionality to an EV driver to use their vehicle for emergency backup behind the meter,
Hmm.
but also compensate them for the the right to use the vehicle as a grid asset. Uh, and there are different models available there, but you can actually make the grid better, put downward pressure on electricity prices, and provide some revenue for yourself under these utility programs if you allow your vehicle to discharge a modest amount of energy. It's sort of like demand response, but
Hmm.
much better because
Yeah.
it can actually discharge to the grid. We're just barely scratching the surface there as well. Um, but it's one of the things that batteries um, enable. And we have, you know, dozens of gigawatt hours of batteries in EVs already in this country, distributed uh, around the grid. So that's going to grow, and the capabilities provided by that technology will
Yeah.
grow if they're done in the right way and if they provide a benefit to the driver. Nobody's going to be forced to do that, but it is possible. Um, and instead of installing an emergency backup generator, if you can account for your critical electricity load for a couple hours just by plugging in your EV or
Mhm.
having a bidirectional inverter, that's a huge benefit.
Yeah.
Um, so I think they will continue to grow over time. The real challenge for any new vehicle on the market today, gas or EV, is affordability.
Yep.
And that's where I think some of the work of the IRA in providing a wave of investment in midstream production, meaning batteries and battery components, battery cells, packs, modules, um, going into vehicle assembly here in the United States. Some that's happened. I think we need to continue supporting that, but supporting domestic manufacturing is, I hope, going to be more consistently possible than supporting, say, EV policy or climate policy has been when you
Mhm.
have a change in administration. I mean, these are factories in the United States. My hope is
Yeah.
that we will continue to support them. That's going to bring down costs for EVs, and that is going to further accelerate adoption.
Great. Makes sense. Yeah. It's funny. You're so used to charging things and batteries in your day-to-day life, your phone, electronics. I have an e-bike, I have an electric weed whacker, everything's
Yeah.
battery. But then, your car for some reason isn't. Like, what do you mean I have to put gas in my car? Why isn't it a battery like everything else? It's funny that people have a hard time with the switch because everything else is all battery powered. Um, but we'll
Yeah.
get there.
Well, as you said, it's a big investment
Yeah.
and it represents mobility and freedom, and so I think, but I think again, we're at the point now where a lot of people know somebody who owns an EV. They don't have to take my word for it.
Mhm.
Or some, elected officials' word for it. They can ask their friend. And I think generally what they're going to hear is overwhelmingly positive.
Switching gears a little bit, what's the biggest risk you've ever taken?
I think I was I switched careers out of grad school um, into renewable energy um, at a time when it was just starting to take off. Now, I won't say that was a huge risk. Uh, in retrospect, it's easy to say, but I was I was so interested in it that it didn't feel like I didn't want to do anything else. It didn't feel like I could have done anything else. But I think anytime you are uh, switching careers, and grad school, business school provides a great opportunity to not only do that, but build a new skill set uh, while you're making that decision. Um, I think it was incredibly exciting, but you know it's hard to say looking back that it was a huge risk because now it seems inevitable in retrospect that it was going to be successful.
Well, lots of things that seem inevitable in retrospect, feel pretty risky when you're, trying to make that
Yeah,
decision. So, well, I'm glad you took the risk. What's something about you that might surprise people?
I could do a backflip off the top of a houseboat.
Well, that's pretty surprising.
Good. All
I don't think I
right.
could do that. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good one.
People are often surprised. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I don't know what that
Was
says,
that a
but
skill that you developed over time, or did you just like try it one day and realize you could do it?
it's hard to really develop that one. You kind of have to go for it. That was a risk, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. You know, I think there's a fine line between risk and recklessness, and I was trying
Mhm.
to censor some of the more reckless decisions I made. But
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. Well, why don't we leave it there? Albert Gore, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Dan.